The bleeding and pain had subsided. Though groggy from the medications and against the stern advice of the doctor who had returned, I rashly insisted on speaking that night. "I haven't come halfway around the world to disappoint a big crowd," I said, with a weak pretense of bravado. The doctor warned me that I was taking a big chance by flying home the next day. If the bleeding resumed on the flight, he warned, I could bleed to death in an hour or two. But I decided my chances were better on the flight than they would be in a Philippine hospital. Ron Nickel, president of Prison Fellowship International, who was traveling with me, made contact with friends in each of the cities where our flight stopped, just in case we had an emergency. So Sunday morning I began a journey that took 16 anxious hours, but eventually got me home to Naples, Florida. Immediately I was given an extensive examination. X-rays revealed a small ulcer, which for some unknown reason had stopped hemorrhaging. But the gastroenterologist didn't buy that diagnosis, which probably saved my life. Ulcers just don't start and stop bleeding, he said. So he ordered more tests. Even before they were complete, he informed me that he had discovered a tumor that had punched a hole in my stomach wall. It was a frightening diagnosis. Thus began an experience that nearly cost me my life, but gained my daughter back. The surgery that would remove the tumor, and perhaps much of my stomach, depending on the results of the biopsy, was scheduled for January 1987 and was to be performed by the chief surgeon at Georgetown Hospital in Washington, D.C. I was given the treatment reserved for VIPs and government officials. Not necessarily a good thing, I would soon discover, but it did mean a private room with a special anteroom right across from the nurse's station. The spacious accommodations would prove to be a good thing, because my stay in the hospital was to be longer, much longer, than anticipated. I told my sons, Wendell and Chris, both in their mid-30s, and the baby of the family, my daughter Emily, then 28, that I would be just fine, that this was simply routine surgery. They certainly didn't need to interrupt their schedules to travel to D.C. My sons agreed. Emily would have none of it. She flew to D.C. the night before the surgery, and along with my wife Patty, was waiting for me as I was wheeled out of the recovery room after 4 hours on the operating table. I'd never known a more beautiful sight in my life than the smiling faces of the two women I most dearly loved. I knew from their expressions I was going to be all right. "Cancer?" I asked, still smiling. They nodded yes. "Did they get it all?" I asked. Again they nodded, before I fell back into my narcotic-induced slumber. Emily and Patty stayed in my room all night as I groaned in pain coming out of the anesthesia's after effects. The next day, though the pain was great, compounded by an uncomfortable drainage tube inserted through my nose into my stomach, I began the recovery. I was at least comforted by the assurance that I'd be out of the hospital in 5 to 6 days. I talked Patty into going home so she could get a good night's sleep, but Emily refused and camped out again, huddled in an easy chair in my room. On the third day, everything came undone. The drainage tube, it turned out, was kinked and had to be twisted around by the doctor, accompanied by his flock of 6 gawking interns. That was one of my most painful moments in the hospital. Later that day, my temperature shot up, alarming the interns, who returned and prescribed massive IV injections of antibiotics. Once I was stabilized, both Patty and Emily went home for the night. Soon after they left, however, I must have taken a serious turn for the worse, because I was in and out of delirium, writhing in pain. My vital signs alarmed the nurse. I don't remember what happened, but soon the doctors surrounded my bed. Close to midnight, the nurses called Emily and Patty and told them to return to the hospital immediately. Sometime that night, I peered through the fog and saw their encouraging smiles once more beside my bed. Although I was in trouble medically, I had the strangest sense of peace as I came in and out of the delirium. Is this what's known as dying grace? I wondered. The only thought in my head was, thank God I know Jesus Christ. If I die, I'll be with him. I had no real fear, except perhaps for the haunting question, how could anyone not come to Christ? Everybody will be in this place sooner or later. I thanked God quietly and tried to thank Emily and Patty as well, but I had difficulty forming words. Speaking took more energy than I had. Every time I would come out of the fog, there stood Emily or Patty or both, holding my hand. Had I not been in good shape, having had a lot of exercise in the weeks leading up to the operation, I might not have made it. My ailment turned out to be a life-threatening staph infection. I will spare you the details of the next horrific 3.5 weeks, because the important part of the story is what happened to my family.